All right, so like I said, today we'll cover just the open-ended questions and affirmations portion of motivational interviewing. We'll do a lot of breakout activities throughout this, and we do want this to be very interactive and discussion-based. So if you do have any questions or things like that throughout, just let Jade or I know, either in the chat box or you can unmute yourself and just let us know. All right, so just to give a brief overview of what motivational interviewing is, the goal of MI, or motivational interviewing, is to help a student move from contemplation to change on their own using motivation that is meaningful to them. So it's really all about supporting someone else through whatever behavior change they want for themselves. We know that change is more likely to happen when it comes from that person's own internal motivations. So we're really acting as a support alongside the other person to bring out those good reasons for change and to help support them through that behavior change. The motivational interviewing conversation helps get students to this goal by allowing them to openly discuss the potential dissonance between their current behaviors and then their future goals or where they want to be. So when we use these different skills within motivational interviewing, specifically open-ended questions and affirmations, that really allows us to have that open discussion and open conversation that gets them thinking about their good reasons for changing and just what they can do to make that change. All right, so we're going to go ahead and start off with a little conversation starter. With this, since it's a pretty small group, I think we'll just do it with a whole group and not do breakout rooms. But yeah, so feel free to answer out loud or in the chat. What are some student behaviors of concern that can be seen in the virtual collegiate experience?
One of the things I've noticed is some of the students that in person are usually super talkative, very involved, virtually may be a little bit more withdrawn and not as interactive or engaged in conversations. And it's usually due because they're super stressed about everything going on.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty common for a lot of students too, and to this new normal, this new routine. And I feel like a lot of the times, you know, it can be easy to kind of like fade away into the background in a Zoom room, especially for our students that are, and it can be hard. So yeah, that's definitely.
Make sure it doesn't take off.
Anyone else want to share their thoughts?
I've noticed that some students can be a little more bold and some of their online communications when they're hidden maybe behind a keyboard. So some of what for some students that have a harder time connecting maybe face to face, they've been a little bit more open and willing to share things in a more blunt fashion.
That's so true. So yeah, at the same time, it goes both ways. So they might feel like, you know, they're not themselves speaking in person, so they feel like they can just kind of say anything in that way, like they're hiding behind the screen. So yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you guys for sharing those. So really thinking about this, we can use some of the skills in motivational interviewing to help guide a student towards that positive behavior change, especially when these changes are hard too, and just learning to adapt to a new normal and a new routine. Using these skills within MI, we can help our students come out on top and be resilient. And so with that.
So when we think about talking to the students in the realm of motivational interviewing, we want to think about the stages of change model. So I'm not sure how many people have heard of this model before, but you hear it a lot in kind of the health promotion, wellness side of things. So with this stages of change model, we use this to determine a student's level of readiness in regards to the behaviors, especially the behavior that they're trying to change. So a really important key factor in this model is that it's definitely not a linear process. It's very fluid. So just think about how if you've ever tried to change a behavior, you know, sometimes you're thinking like, yeah, like I'm not really into it, but maybe someday I'll do it. And then all of a sudden you get the motivation to do it and you do it. And then maybe you kind of relapse into old behavior. So that goes the same with your students. So we want to make sure when we're talking to students about their behavior changes that we meet them at the level that they're at and then they're ready to go. So, you know, for example, if we're talking about the realm of changing a type of like study habit or, you know, or something like that, smoking, any kind of behavior, you want to kind of gauge where the student is at. So in this pre-contemplation, they're not thinking about it at all. So they may not even come up with the idea to even change the behavior. To them, it's not a behavior that needs to be changed. So they're just, it's not even on their mind. More than often, if students are talking to you about a certain behavior, they're probably in this contemplation stage, right? They're thinking like, yeah, this is something that I want to do. There are a lot of barriers. Here they are. But there are some things that may be challenging for me to do in order to kind of get to that goal. So I don't know how ready I am, but I'm thinking about it. That's that contemplation. And that's where students more than likely are kind of in that beginning stage. So as you talk to students using MI, you kind of want them to move through the stages of change model. And again, it's not linear.
Oh, good. I gotta.
Sometimes they'll move to the preparation stage and then go back to contemplation. And sometimes they'll be in this contemplation stage and then already just jump into action, right? We see that a lot with students. They're ready, they're set to go, and they just start doing it. So it's important just to kind of recognize where your student is at and then how to move them along this model. And you do that just with the motivational interviewing and the skills that we're kind of talking about today.
All right, so the foundations of motivational interviewing are really these 4 principles right here. So expressing empathy, developing discrepancy, rolling with resistance, and then supporting self-efficacy. So I'll kind of walk through each of these one at a time. So empathy, when we talk about empathy, we really mean seeing the world through someone else's eyes, walking in their shoes, just really trying to understand them. People won't really be willing to open up if we don't first establish empathy with our students. So we'll really talk about ways that you can use these open-ended questions and affirmations to establish that empathy and really give your students the space to just feel comfortable discussing changes that might be hard for them. And in that way you can help support them through it. And then we talk about developing discrepancy. So really, MI is all about helping someone with their own behavior change journey, but sometimes we'll have to kind of point out those discrepancies in their current behavior to their future goals or where they want to be. So sometimes this takes reflections, reflecting back what you're hearing them say so they can hear it from another lens, and just really making sure that the behaviors that they're doing now are in line with where they want to be in the future and that there's no gaps in that. Rolling with resistance. So we know change can be really hard a lot of the time. And if we were to just give advice and tell the other person what we want them to do, they might be very hesitant toward that. They might even be defensive, which is somewhat to be expected. So that's really why in motivational interviewing, we want to pull the good reasons for change from the other person so they can hear that from themselves and then really create that sustainable and lasting change. So if a student is resistant towards something, instead of fighting that resistance, we really roll with it and use those open-ended questions to kind of challenge them almost and get them to really think about the behaviors that they're doing now and maybe some improvements that they want to make for themselves. And then supporting self-efficacy. So as we know, students are responsible for the choices that they make in carrying out their own actions, but we really want to be alongside supporting them and helping to build them up and build up their confidence to carry out whatever changes they want to make for themselves to help them meet those future goals. So in this way, we really use affirmations, which we'll talk about in a little bit, to build up that self-efficacy and really build on that student's past successes, current things that they're doing really well that you can highlight to help push them through a change that may be really difficult for them. So just being able to build up that confidence in whatever it is to help move them towards their goals.
So in kind of keeping with that same message, a way to support what Emma was just talking about is using what we call the ORs. So this is open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summary. So in this presentation, I'll focus heavily on the open-ended questions and the affirmations, and just touch briefly on the other two. But with this ORs, with these tools in motivational interviewing, we listen for change talk. We use this method of ORs to dig a little bit deeper into the student's motivation for change. This is kind of the guide to work with the individual towards that lasting change that they're trying to achieve, and really push them to become a little bit more internally motivated. And if you don't encounter this change talk while you're using the ORS method, you just want to make sure that you're reflecting on the statements, which will then kind of guide the student, whoever you're talking to accomplish that change talk. So when we're thinking about open-ended questions, this is a big one in motivational interviewing. We want to make sure that you ask the question in a way that's not a yes or no. So it can't be answered back in a yes or a no, or even a maybe. So when we're thinking about these questions, we want to kind of start off with, tell me about, describe or explain, give me some examples, or fill me in on. And also, what concerns do you have? So when you kind of open up the discussion with these open-ended questions, it kind of puts it back on the student or the individual to kind of think a little bit more deeply about their response, and it helps them to kind of come up with the solution or the reasoning why they want to start working on this certain behavior and how to change it. And then when we move on to affirmations, so these are statements that help affirm a student's ability to create their best life. So they're meant to, in essence, build that self-efficacy in a student, which then in terms obviously makes them feel a little bit more capable to make the change. So affirmations are statements that are specific to behaviors or character traits that help create this positivity with actions and thoughts. So when we're thinking about specifics here, we want to make sure they're kind of personalized comments so that they support that specific change. So some examples could be, thank you for, you took a positive step by, great idea too. So it's really just kind of giving that like positive reinforcement back on that student or that individual that, hey, you are doing a really great job. Look at your success that you've made so far. So it kind of gives it back like, hey, I am able to achieve this behavior because I've been able to achieve these small successes thus far. So I'm going to continue to feel that motivation. I'm going to continue to push myself to keep making that change. And then real quickly, we'll talk about reflections and summary in another presentation, but reflections are just statements that mirror back to the student what they said. And then summaries are kind of in the same light where it helps draw conclusions from what they've kind of experienced or what they've said. And again, we'll talk about that in another presentation. And then, so this is our kind of activity to go along with that open-ended questions, because it is super important to work on these. So since we have about 10, I think maybe we can break up into some groups, Emma, and if you will, take a quick picture of this, because what you'll want to do in your groups is, these are very close-ended statements, so we want to turn them into open-ended statements. So going through 1 through 6, how could you change to these open-ended questions? And Emma went ahead and threw them in the chat as well. So when we put you into those breakout groups, you can just look on the chat and use them if you didn't snap a picture. But this is just a kind of a great way to practice using those open-ended questions to help with the students and the individuals that you're working with.
Should we, I think we could have you all do each question in your breakout rooms probably.
I think so.
Sounds good. Okay, so I'm going to put you into rooms right now. And yeah, we'll share them when we come back to the bigger group. One second. Okay, there we go. So some examples of ways you could start affirmations are things like, you know, thank you for doing this. It seems like you really value such and such. You took a positive step by doing this. That's a great idea to do that. So really just helping to encourage the student along their behavior change journey using these affirmations. So with that, we'll go into another breakout room activity. So we have 2 scenarios here, and I'll post them both in the chat. But in your groups, you'll read through the scenarios and then come up with some follow-up affirmations that you could give as a response, and then also some open-ended questions that you could continue the conversation with and really help the student to elaborate or open up to whatever they're going through. So we'll have group 1 do scenario 1, and then group 2 do scenario 2. So that sounds good to everyone. So affirmations and then follow-up open-ended questions.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, so what were some of your affirmations and then follow-up open-ended questions you all came up with?
So we didn't get to talk a ton, but we were just talking about how to like kind of ask the student the questions to help them see like what things might be making them nervous about approaching an instructor, and helping them kind of understand the instructor's role. Because like from our perspective, we see like, oh, that's what an instructor is there for, but maybe there's like a disconnect with the students feelings about like what the instructor is there for, and so trying to help like ask questions that would help them kind of see that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good response, and just trying to help them come up with that on their own. Because I think a lot of times, just for myself, like, you know the answer a lot of the time, so you just want to tell the student what the answer is. But knowing that it might be their first time going through something, or first time having to deal with maybe a harder and more difficult instructor, that can really help them to come up with some of those solutions to the barriers or challenges that they're having on their own. Nice. What about scenario 2?
So in our group, we talked about affirming the fact that the student has pulled their grade up, even though they've been dealing with a lot of challenges at home. And with regards to the open-ended question, we talked a little bit about, asking about their self-care at home, just knowing that they're dealing with a lot of stress and having them elaborate on that. We talked about asking them what resources worked for them in terms of pulling their grades up to C's, just to kind of get a feel for, what has been working for them and can that be maintained? And also asking about what resources they may need from ASU to give us an idea of how we can better support them too.
Right. Thanks for sharing that, Michelle. Those are awesome responses. I think especially getting them to elaborate on some of those past successes goes a long way when we think about the principles of motivational interviewing and that self-efficacy piece and really building up their own confidence and their abilities to do whatever it is that they need to do. So yeah, and then also connecting them to resources as well. So C3 actually stands for compassionate communication that leads to connection. So knowing that we have so many resources that we do at ASU is just important to be able to know that we don't have to deal with this just ourselves, just as our student supervisor. We have a whole list of resources for our students. So great responses, you guys.
I also like to use the Indigenous Wellbeing book that your department created for us. They have amazing affirmations, and I always reference that page, even especially because you allowed us to change some of them for our community, and so I use that book a lot, especially. And then I took a C3 course before, and it was so insightful. So it helps me both in my work as well as advice. So thank you for that.
Thank you for sharing that, Laura. Yeah. So using that book, I think, can help kind of just start and continue that conversation and to keep it going. I will try to find the link to it because we do have it linked on our wellness website. And that's available for all of you to use as well with your students. But yeah. All right, so we'll kind of wrap up as we're approaching the end of our time here. I know that session went by really fast, it felt like. But we just really want to make sure that these sessions are applicable to you and what you do and the roles you serve at ASU working with students. So any kind of final thoughts or things that you want to share? Like Laura mentioned, we do offer continuing courses for C3. This was one of our skill building courses. So if you go to our wellness.asu.edu website /C3, you can find a list of our trainings and then request future trainings as well. So we have C3 sessions 1 and 2, and then we have 4 different skill building sessions that really dig deep into the different skills within motivational interviewing. It's always really good practice. I think motivational interviewing is just one of those skills that you have to constantly use. I love doing them just because I feel like really that's the only way to get better is to practice and have these kinds of conversations. So if that's something you're interested, definitely check us out. We also just wanted to share a short list of resources at ASU, again, just as a reminder for you and your students. And with that, I also wanted to leave just a couple minutes at the end if you could please fill out our evaluation survey. It helps to just make sure that these sessions are tailored to your needs and that they can be applicable to the work that you do. So I'll also post the link in the chat right here, or you can pull up your phone to get the QR code. And then if you haven't signed in, I'm also going to repost the sign-in link as well. And does anyone have any last questions? Well, let us know. Jade and I will be here for a couple of minutes.
And also feel free to email Emma and I as well. We're found on our staff directory page at fitness.asu.edu. We're always happy to answer questions, or if you want additional training or just any additional thoughts, please email us. We love to hear from our partners around campus. So we're always here to help out in any way you guys need.
And I'm also going to put our C3 website in the chat as well. So if you're interested in any future trainings. And then I just found our wellness book. So I'm going to copy that link in there as well. We have a book that's specific to each of our academic colleges and groups. So definitely use that as a resource with your students. It has a lot of information on just overall well-being, and then different worksheets that they can fill out as well. And then just resources in the back as reminders for them. Yeah, I think that's it. So thank you all so much for joining us. And yeah, for all the good conversation and everything. So have a good rest of your day.